Joy sat on the small wooden bench outside her family's compound, her chin resting in her hands as she watched the other children laugh and chase one another in the dusty village square. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows, and the laughter echoed like a taunt. Joy wanted nothing more than to join them, to run, play, and feel the wind against her face, but her father's voice still rang in her ears. "You're not like those children. Stay where I can see you, Joy." Moses was a man whose words were law, tall, broad-shouldered, and with a gaze that could silence anyone. He ruled the household with a firm hand. To him, the world outside their compound was full of dangers his 12-year-old daughter could not be exposed to. He believed the more he kept her close, the safer she would be. Mary, her mother, was gentler, yet she never questioned Moses. Instead, she would offer soft words of comfort when Joy's eyes filled with frustration. "Just listen to your father, Joy," Mary would whisper. "It's for your own good." But was it? Joy didn't understand why her life had to be so different. She wasn't allowed to play in the square like Praise and the other girls, or visit the market with friends. She spent her days between chores and staring longingly through the compound's wooden gate, feeling like a bird in a cage. Why couldn't her parents trust her? Why couldn't they let her live? And then there was Kenneth. Kenneth had been her friend for as long as she could remember. He lived just down the road, and though his family didn't have much, he always wore a wide, mischievous grin. Unlike Joy, Kenneth's parents were lenient. He could run and play freely, and that freedom made him a magnet for Joy's attention. When the school bell rang in the afternoons, Kenneth would walk beside Joy. The other children teased them, calling Kenneth her boyfriend, but they didn't mind. Their friendship was simple and innocent. Secret smiles, whispered jokes, and stolen moments when no one was watching. It was Kenneth who brought light to Joy's grey days. Whenever he leaned in and said, "Joy, let's do something fun," her heart would race. She didn't care what it was. It always made her feel alive. And so she wondered, do parents like hers unknowingly push their children into the arms of adventure, or even danger? She paused, her eyes drifting to the gate as laughter filled the air again. Should love have boundaries? Her father would say yes, but to Joy, freedom didn't feel dangerous, only necessary. Little did she know, the next time Kenneth whispered an idea, it would be the start of something she could never take back. It was the kind of afternoon that made the air feel heavy. The sun hung high, blazing over the quiet village, where shadows of trees stretched lazily over cracked earth. Inside her small home, Joy sat near the window, staring out longingly. Her father, Moses, had just finished his lunch and settled into his usual nap. The rhythmic sound of his snoring echoed faintly through the house. Joy's eyes darted to the door. Her heart beat with impatience. Outside, life seemed brighter. Children's laughter, the rustling of palm leaves, and the distant sound of a river she had only heard about from others. She sighed. Her father's rules were iron bars. She could only look, never touch, hear, but never explore. A soft knock on the window startled her. She turned sharply to see Kenneth, his mischievous grin peeking through the wooden slats. Her lips curled into a small smile as he motioned for her to come closer. Withdrawing the key, she opened the window. "Joy," he whispered urgently, his voice low. "Let's go to the river." Her smile faded. "The river?" she repeated in a half-whisper, shaking her head. "Kenneth, I can't. If my father finds out, he'll—" "Barney?" Kenneth rolled his eyes and interrupted. "He won't. He's sleeping, isn't he? It's just for a little while. Everyone goes there. It's fun. You'll love it. Joy bit her lip, her mind racing. She knew Kenneth. His charm and easy smile had gotten her into trouble before, but the way he spoke about the river made it sound like a magical place. One where the water was cool and the weight of the world didn't matter. Her hands trembled. What if something happens? Kenneth tilted his head, pretending to be offended. What could happen? It's just the river, Joy. I promise, it's safe. A long pause stretched between them. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of a bird's call. Joy glanced back toward her father's room and listened for the snoring. It was steady, unbroken. The house felt suffocating all over again. A resolve cracked. Okay, she whispered. But just for a little while. Kenneth's grin widened. Good, hurry up. They moved quickly, quietly. Joy tiptoed through the small living room, her heart pounding with every step. She froze when a loose floorboard creaked, but Moses' snoring continued undisturbed. She grabbed her slippers and slipped out the door. Her cries hammered, her chest tight. Outside, the heat hit her instantly, but it felt freeing. Kenneth was already leading the way, excitement in his steps. Come on, he said. The path is this way. No one will see us. Joy followed, her pulse still racing. They ducked through bushes, their small feet crunching dry leaves beneath them. Kenneth knew the way well, and he led her down a narrow, hidden footpath that twisted through tall grass and trees. As they walked, Joy's worry lingered. She glanced back over her shoulder more than once. What if someone sees us? She asked nervously. Kenneth looked back with a reassuring smile. No one will. It's just us, Joy. The further they walked, the quieter the village became, the noise of everyday life fading behind them. All she could hear now were cicadas buzzing and the faint sound of flowing water, growing louder with every step. As they neared the river, Kenneth glanced back at her and said with a teasing voice, See? I told you it's not far. Joy gave a small nod, but deep inside, something unsettled her. She couldn't shake it. The feeling that they were walking towards something they couldn't turn back from. What was supposed to be a simple escape turned into something no one could have imagined. The narrator's voice cuts in, a pause for effect. Was this innocent adventure worth the risk? The river. The sound of rushing water grew louder. The path opened up suddenly, and before them stretched the river, calm, glittering, and surrounded by lush trees that swayed gently in the breeze. It was beautiful, exactly as Kenneth had promised. Colin leaned against the rail and looked out through the gates at the big. But even as Joy smiled faintly, letting herself believe it had been worth sneaking out, the chilling question remained. Why had she come to London? What more could she do at the reservation? Why had she felt like losing? It might do her harm to return. If you knew this would be their last meeting, would you stop them? The riverbank was alive with beauty. Lush green trees swayed gently, their shadows dancing on the water's shimmering surface. Birds called from above, and the faint hum of insects carried through the warm afternoon breeze. To Joy, it felt like stepping into a secret world, far away from her father's strict gaze and the stifling rules of her home. For a moment, everything felt free. Kenneth grinned as he picked up a smooth stone and flung it across the water. Plop, 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 plop. See? 3 skips, he bragged, puffing out his chest. Joy laughed, clapping her hands. You think you're the king of stone skipping? Watch this. She bent low, grabbing her own stone. Her first try sank immediately, and Kenneth burst into laughter, doubling over. Joy swatted at his arm, giggling. The sound of their laughter mingled with the rustling leaves and the gentle lapping of the river. It was their moment, simple, innocent, and carefree. But the beauty hid its danger. The calm water flowed deeper than it seemed, and the rocks beneath the surface were slick, waiting silently for the slightest misstep. Kenneth's voice broke the calm. "Let's go in, just the shallow part, I promise." Joy froze. "I don't know." Her voice trailed off, her eyes darting to the water. She knew how her father always warned her about the river. "Water doesn't forgive carelessness," he'd say. "Come on," Kenneth teased, already rolling up his shorts. "Are you scared?" The words stung her pride. Scared? She wasn't scared. "Fine," she said, forcing a smile, "but just the edge." "Aye!" They stepped into the water, its coldness surprising against their warm skin. Joy shivered but soon grew used to it. Kenneth splashed her lightly and she shrieked, splashing him back, forgetting her earlier hesitation. They laughed as droplets sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight, but then Kenneth began wading further, careless and confident. Joy hesitated, her feet sinking slightly into the soft riverbed. "Kenneth, stop! This part's deeper." He turned to her, grinning. "It's fine, Joy. Don't be such a..." In an instant, Joy's foot slipped. Her arms flailed as the riverbed gave way beneath her. The smile vanished from her face, replaced with terror. "Kenneth!" she screamed, as her body plunged into the deeper current. Kenneth froze for half a second before panic set in. "Joy!" he shouted, splashing toward her. But the river was no longer calm. Its current pulled at Joy, dragging her further. Her head dipped beneath the surface, then reappeared, gasping, her arms reaching for something, anything. "Joy! Grab my hand!" Kenneth yelled, but the water mocked his desperation. The river that had been so peaceful now roared in Joy's ears, drowning out her cries. Her hands clawed at the water, her strength fading fast. The sun overhead blurred into bright streaks. Her lungs burned as the river swallowed her again. Kenneth's voice cracked with fear. "Somebody help!" But no one was there. The riverbank, once so full of life, now seemed cold and empty. The Archbishop's square columns were still standing, guaranteed of their seats, but the great millwork of the... What would you do if you saw your loved one drowning, with no one around to help? Would you freeze? Would you fight against the impossible? Kenneth fought the current, reaching again and again for Joy, but the water was stronger. Her scream, piercing, desperate, echoed one final time before the river went silent. The ripples faded, the birds still sang, the trees still swayed, but Joy was gone. She sat. Kenneth hit the water with a loud splash, arms thrashing as he fought to reach Joy. The river, once so calm, now churned violently around her tiny, flailing body. He could barely see her through the splashes. 1 second, her face was above water, eyes wide with terror, and the next, she was gone, swallowed whole. "Joy!" Kenneth screamed, his voice cracking as he gasped for air. He lunged forward, hands reaching blindly into the murky depths, but all he felt was the icy rush of water. Joy surfaced again, just a few feet away, choking and sputtering. Her screams came out in broken bursts, muffled by the river pulling her under. "Help me! Kenneth, please!" Her voice shook him to his core. Kenneth swam harder, his limbs burning with exhaustion. The current dragged her further, faster than he could move. His heart pounded as fear set in. Why couldn't he reach her? Why wasn't anyone coming? "Somebody, help us!" His desperate cries echoed across the empty riverbank, but no one answered. No footsteps. No voices. Just the ceaseless roar of the water. Joy's head bobbed up again. Just for a moment. Her arms flailed weakly, as though she was trying to grab the air itself. Her eyes locked on Kenneth's, full of fear. And something else. Was it regret? Was she thinking about her family? Her father's stern voice, or her mother's warm embrace? Kenneth pushed the thought away and dove beneath the water. Silence swallowed him instantly. Cold, endless silence. He clawed at the depths, hands swiping at nothing, lungs screaming for oxygen. Where was she? His mind raced. The weight of the water pressed against him like a stone. When he surfaced again, gasping, Joy was gone. The ripples where she had been just moments ago were already smoothing out, as though the river itself wanted to erase her. No, Kenneth whispered, his voice trembling. He scanned the water, spinning in circles, his heart pounding against his ribs. The river stretched out before him, wide and unyielding. She was gone. A muffled scrape came from outside. The Kendenark rose. Kenneth's screams broke through the air once more, raw and guttural. He couldn't stop calling her name. "Joy! Joy!" Her head sank. But the only response was the eerie stillness of the water. The river had claimed her. Silence fell over the scene, deafening in its finality. Outwell started using her flashlight, her way-back time added to the frightening level of the river's unknown. What went through Joy's mind in those last moments? The narrator's voice cuts in, cold and reflective. Was it fear or regret? Could she hear Kenneth's cries as she slipped away? Did she wish she had stayed home? Could she wish she had stayed home? Kenneth stayed there for what felt like hours, shivering in the water, his cries slowly fading to choked sobs. Alone on the riverbank, the weight of what had happened settled on him like a stone too heavy to bear. He was just a boy, and Joy was gone. Purchase face reddened, and he shifted slowly from one foot to the other. Kenneth's feet pounded the dirt path as he ran, his breath ragged, his voice hoarse as he screamed for help. "Joy! Joy is in the river! Somebody help!" The words tumbled out between sobs, echoing through the quiet village like a bell of doom. At first, no one understood what he was saying. The boy, soaked and trembling, was a sight that sent shivers down the spines of those who saw him. Slowly, people gathered. Women leaving their pots on the fire, men rushing from their farms, and children trailing behind in confusion. Paul and Alfred, standing next to them, stood for the first time. When Kenneth finally choked out the truth, the village erupted into chaos. "Joy is drowning!" he cried again, pointing frantically toward the river. The villagers didn't waste a second. A group of men, led by Joy's father, Moses, grabbed ropes and ran toward the riverbank. The air was thick with urgency, feet slapping against the ground, whispers of fear carried by the wind. Could she still be alive? A voice curled in his stomach. By the time they arrived, the river was calm. Too calm. The men searched the water, calling her name, their voices desperate, their eyes scanning every ripple. Minutes dragged into eternity. Then someone shouted, "Over there!" Someone shouted for a second, followed by the splash of hands plunging into the water. Slowly they pulled her out, Joy's small body limp and lifeless, her dress clinging to her like a shadow. The sight pierced through Moses like a dagger. He dropped to his knees, his voice breaking as he let out a cry so raw it silenced everyone. My Joy. My daughter. Mary, Joy's mother, was inconsolable. She wailed, her hands trembling as she reached for her child, her cries rising above the quiet sobs of the crowd. A few women tried to hold her back, but she collapsed onto the ground, beating her chest as tears streamed down her face. Kenneth stood at the edge of the scene, frozen. His body shook violently as the guilt wrapped around him like a chain. Villagers glanced at him with mixed expressions. Some pitied the boy, others stared with quiet accusation. He hadn't meant for this to happen, but did it matter? Back in the village, the elders gathered under the large iroko tree to discuss the tragedy. Their voices were low but firm, their faces hard with judgment. Reckless behavior, one elder muttered. Where were her parents? How does a girl sneak away without anyone noticing? Another shook his head. It's the boy Kenneth. He led her there. But someone else whispered, isn't it the parents' fault? If you grip a child too tightly, won't they look for freedom anywhere they can? Their words swirled like a storm, but no answer emerged. Whose fault was it? Kenneth, for persuading her to go? Joy's parents, for being so strict that she felt the need to sneak away? Or was it fate, one cruel twist that no one could have stopped? What do you think? Could someone have saved her? Could one decision, one moment have changed everything? As evening fell, the village grew quiet. Joy's body was prepared for burial, and the air felt heavier than before. People spoke in hushed tones, the weight of the tragedy lingering like smoke. Kenneth sat alone outside his house, staring into the distance, haunted by her face, and the sound of her voice crying for help. One simple step into the river led to a lifetime of pain. Sometimes freedom comes at too high a cost.